They say love cannot rewrite DNA, that an apex predator will always revert to its killer instincts. But deep in the Zimanga Reserve, a grieving Border Collie proved the world wrong. From the moment she chose to warm her ancient enemy, to the bloody tragedy that tore them apart, and the earth-shaking reunion in the face of death. This isn't just an animal story. It is proof that sometimes family is forged by soul, not by blood. The shovel hit the dry red earth with a dull final thud that seemed to echo louder than the thunder rolling in from the east. Elias Thorne wiped a mixture of sweat and rain from his forehead, looking down at the small mound of fresh dirt beneath the acacia tree. It was a simple grave for Barnaby, a dog that had been more than a pet. He had been a partner, a shadow, and a witness to 14 years of Elias's life in the bush. Now the silence that followed was deafening. Standing a few feet away, rain matting her black and white coat, was Luna. The Border Collie didn't whine. She didn't scratch at the earth. She simply vibrated with a nervous, electric energy, her eyes darting between Elias and the grave. Since Barnaby's breathing had stopped early that morning, Luna had been spinning in tight, frantic circles, her herding instinct short-circuiting with no one left to watch over. Elias reached out to touch her head, but she flinched, tail tucked, staring past him into the gray horizon. The grief in the house was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. Needing to outrun the silence, Elias took the Jeep out on patrol an hour later, with Luna pacing anxiously in the passenger seat. The reserve was vast, a landscape of scrub brush and rocky outcrops that usually brought him peace. But today, every shadow looked like a memory. The radio remained silent until he spotted the circling vultures near the northern fence line. He parked and grabbed his rifle, signaling Luna to stay. She curled into a tight ball on the seat, burying her nose in her paws. Elias walked 100 yards into the thicket and found the tragedy. A lioness, magnificent even in death, lay caught in a wire snare. She had been dead for a day, maybe 2. The flies were already thick. It was the brutal arithmetic of the wild, something Elias had seen 1,000 times, yet today, with the dirt still fresh on his hands from Barnaby's grave, it felt personal. It felt like the world was stripping away life just because it could. He was about to radio it in when he saw the movement. Tucked against the cold, stiff belly of the lioness was a scrap of tawny fur, no bigger than a house cat. The cub was barely breathing, its ribs showing through patchy fur, eyes crusted shut with infection. It was a male, dehydrated and waiting to die. Logic dictated protocol. Nature should take its course. But as the cub let out a weak, rasping mewl, Elias felt something fracture inside his chest. He couldn't bury another animal today. Not today. He scooped the limp creature up, wrapping it in his jacket. It weighed nothing, just bone and a fading heartbeat. Back at the station, Dr. Aris shook his head before he even touched the animal. "Elias, look at him. He's gone. His kidneys are likely shutting down. Even if we hydrate him, where does he go? The overflow facility is full. You know the protocol for orphans this young." "He's not dead yet, Aris," Elias said, his voice rougher than intended. "Just give him fluids. I'll take him to my quarters for the night. If he doesn't make it to sunrise, I'll dig the hole myself. But I'm not letting him die on a metal table." The vet sighed, seeing the look in the ranger's eyes, the look of a man teetering on the edge. He administered the fluids and antibiotics, handing Elias a bottle of formula with a look of pity. "Good luck, Elias. Don't get attached." The cabin was dark when Elias returned. He set the cardboard box containing the cub near the fireplace and slumped onto the sofa, exhausted. The smell of the wild, musky, metallic, and distinctly predator wafted from the box. Luna, who had been hiding under the kitchen table, suddenly froze. Her nose twitched. The scent of a lion, even a dying one, was the scent of an ancient enemy. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in her throat. The hair along her spine stood up like a razor-back ridge. She crept forward, stalking the box, her teeth bared. Elias sat up, his heart hammering. "Luna, leave it," he commanded, but his voice was weak. He prepared to intervene, terrified that in her anxious, grieving state she would snap the cub's neck in a second. This was a mistake. He had brought a monster into her sanctuary. Luna reached the box. She stiffened, looking down at the ball of fur. The cub, sensing warmth nearby, let out a tiny, high-pitched cry, a sound of pure, desperate need. The growl in Luna's throat cut off abruptly. She tilted her head, her ears perking up. The predator scent was there, yes, but the sound was that of something lost, something separated from the pack. Slowly, agonizingly, Luna lowered her head into the box. Elias held his breath, muscles coiled to spring. But Luna didn't bite. She opened her mouth and gave a long, rough lick across the cub's matted face. Then another. She whined softly, nudging the cub's flank with her nose, checking for a response. The cub shifted, instinctively pushing against the wet nose, seeking comfort. Luna looked back at Elias, her eyes no longer manic or vacant. They were sharp, focused, and filled with a sudden, overwhelming purpose. She climbed into the oversized box, curled her body around the shivering lion, and rested her chin on his back. For the first time since Barnaby died, the house was quiet. Weeks turned into months, and the dry season began to loosen its grip on the reserve, painting the scrubland in tentative shades of green. Inside Elias's fenced compound, a different kind of miracle was taking shape, one that defied every biological imperative Dr. Eris had ever studied. Saul was no longer the dying scrap of fur found by the snare. He was growing with terrifying speed, his paws already the size of saucers, his tawny coat sleek and rippling with muscle. Yet inside that growing frame of an apex predator lived the soul of a confused, overeager puppy. To Saul, Luna was not prey, nor was she a rival. She was the absolute authority of his world. The Border Collie's maternal instinct had morphed seamlessly into her working instinct. She didn't just mother the lion, she herded him. It became their morning ritual. When Elias opened the back door, Saul would bound out, clumsy and exuberant, chasing butterflies or chewing on the tires of the Jeep. But the moment he strayed too close to the perimeter fence, where the scent of the true wild lay heavy, a black and white blur would cut him off. Luna moved low to the ground, eyes locked on the cub, dictating his boundaries with sharp yips and calculated nips at his heels. Saul would tumble over his own paws, rolling onto his back in submission, paws waving in the air, waiting for Luna to groom his ears as an apology. It was a dance of dominance that was tender, yet absolute, the shepherd and her single, oversized sheep. But the wild has a way of testing the domestic. One humid afternoon, the gate had been left unlatched by a delivery driver. Elias was in the shed when he heard the commotion, a sound of crashing brush and a high-pitched squeal that didn't belong to a dog or a lion. A warthog, easily 200 pounds of gristle and tusk, had wandered into the yard, rooting aggressively near the water trough. Saul, now 5 months old and fueled by a surging testosterone he didn't yet understand, froze. His tail twitched. The ancient programming in his DNA whispered a command: hunt. Saul launched himself from the porch. It was a brave, foolish charge. He lacked the stealth of a lioness or the weight of a full-grown male. He slammed into the warthog's flank, but his claws couldn't penetrate the thick hide. The warthog squealed, whipped its head around, and slashed upward with razor-sharp tusks. Saul yelped, scrambling backward, dust flying, as the angry boar prepared to charge the confused cub. Before the warthog could close the distance, Luna struck. She didn't attack the boar's throat. She wasn't a killer. She was a manager of chaos. She hit the warthog from the side, barking a sharp, rhythmic cadence that disoriented the beast. She weaved in and out, snapping at its hamstrings, forcing it to turn, then turn again. She was a master tactician, using angles and speed to drive the threat away from her charge. Within seconds, she had channeled the confused warthog right back out the open gate, chasing it 50 yards into the bush before returning, chest heaving, to check on Saul. Elias watched from the shed door, his rifle lowered, stunned. Saul was trembling, a shallow scratch on his shoulder. He didn't roar in defiance. He crawled toward Luna, licking her muzzle, seeking reassurance. The heir to the savannah had been saved by a sheepdog. However, the safety of the yard was an illusion that was beginning to fracture. That night, the air grew heavy. The crickets fell silent. From the darkness beyond the electric fence, a sound vibrated through the floorboards of the cabin, a roar so deep it felt like the earth itself was groaning. It was Titan, the dominant male of the Southern Pride, a scarred veteran of a dozen turf wars, had come to investigate the scent of the intruder. Elias looked out the window. In the moonlight, he could see the massive silhouette of the wild lion pacing the fence line, his eyes reflecting the porch light like burning coals. Titan wasn't just passing through, he was marking boundaries. He smelled a challenger. Inside the cabin, the reaction was immediate. Saul, who should have been answering that call, who should have been pacing the glass in a display of territorial aggression, did neither. He was terrified. The sound of a true king stripped away his confidence. He scrambled across the wooden floor, claws skittering, and wedged himself behind the sofa where Luna lay. Luna didn't cower. She sat up, placing herself between the window and the trembling lion cub. A low growl rumbled in her throat, not the ferocious roar of the wild, but the protective warning of a mother guarding her young against the boogeyman. Dr. Eris, who had stopped by to check Saul's vaccination records, stood beside Elias, watching the scene with a grim expression. The charm of the odd couple that had amused the reserve staff for months had evaporated from his face. "You see that, Elias?" Eris whispered, gesturing to the cowering lion and the defiant dog. "That's not cute anymore. It's a tragedy waiting to happen. Titan knows Saul is here, and Saul thinks he's a dog. But look at his paws. Look at his jaw. He's going to double in size in the next 6 months." Elias looked at Saul, whose head was now resting on Luna's flank, his eyes wide with fear. "Nature doesn't care about your fairy tale, Elias," Eris continued, his voice softening but losing none of its edge. "That cub is a ticking time bomb. One day he's going to realize he doesn't need her protection. He's going to realize he can crush her. And on that day, if Titan doesn't kill him first, Saul might accidentally kill the only thing he loves." Elias said nothing. He watched Luna lick the top of Saul's head, soothing the trembling beast. The storm was coming, and the little fence around his heart was not going to be strong enough to hold it back. Time is a cruel thief, and nowhere was its theft more apparent than in the changing silhouette of Elias's backyard. By the time Saul reached his first birthday, he was a tawny giant, weighing in at 300 pounds of coiled muscle and restless energy. The clumsy cub who used to trip over his own paws was gone. In his place stood a subadult male whose mane was beginning to sprout in patchy dark tufts around a neck thicker than a tree trunk. Luna, by contrast, seemed to have shrunk. At 7 years old, the Border Collie was graying around the muzzle. She still commanded the yard with the same sharp barks and intense stares, but the physics of their game had shifted dangerously. When she nipped at Saul's heels to herd him away from the gate, it was no longer a mother correcting a child. It was a 40-pound dog annoying an apex predator who could snap her spine with a casual swipe. Elias watched them with a knot in his stomach that never quite loosened. He knew the day was coming. He could see it in the way Saul watched the birds, not with curiosity, but with a predator's frozen focus. He could see it in the way Saul's playfighting was becoming rougher, his growls vibrating deep in a chest built to thunder across the savannah. The breaking point arrived on a suffocatingly hot Tuesday afternoon. The air was still, the kind of heavy silence that precedes a violent storm. Elias was in the kitchen repairing a broken radio when the explosion of noise shattered the peace. It started with a roar, not from the yard, but from the other side of the perimeter fence. Titan had returned. The massive wild male had been stalking the boundary for weeks, his patience wearing thin. This time, he wasn't just pacing. He was charging the chain link, throwing his 500 pounds against the metal mesh with a terrifying metallic crash. Inside the yard, Saul didn't cower behind the sofa this time. Something ancient and dormant in his blood woke up. The subadult lion roared back, a sound that was still cracking, not yet a king's thunder, but defiant enough to be a challenge. Saul charged the fence, his claws digging into the red earth, throwing himself against the barrier in a blind, testosterone-fueled rage. He wanted to get to Titan. He wanted blood. Luna saw chaos, and her instincts screamed at her to restore order. To her, Saul was just a sheep that had gone rogue. She didn't see a 300-pound killing machine. She saw her charge misbehaving. Barking furiously, Luna sprinted into the dust cloud. She cut in front of Saul, snapping at his front legs, trying to turn him, trying to drive him back to the safety of the porch. "No! Back!" her body language screamed. In the red haze of his rage, Saul didn't see his mother. He didn't see the creature who had cleaned his face and warmed his nights. He only saw an obstacle preventing him from reaching his enemy. Saul spun around, his lip curled and swiped. It wasn't a kill shot. It was a "get away from me" swat, the kind lions use on annoying cubs. But Saul wasn't a cub, and Luna wasn't a lion. The sound was sickening, a dull thud followed by a sharp, high-pitched yelp that cut through the roaring like a knife. Luna was lifted off her feet and thrown 10 feet through the air, slamming hard against the wall of the shed. She crumpled into the dust and didn't get up. The silence that followed was absolute. Titan, losing interest or perhaps sensing the shift, melted back into the bush. Saul stood panting, his chest heaving. The red haze cleared from his amber eyes. He blinked, looking down at his massive paw, then at the black and white heap by the wall. He let out a low, confused sound. A burr of inquiry. He took a step toward her, his ears flat. "No, get back!" Elias screamed, bursting out the back door with a tranquilizer rifle he had prayed never to use. Saul froze, looking at Elias, then at Luna. The lion whined, a sound of pure, heartbroken confusion. He tried to approach her again, to lick her as she had licked him 1,000 times, but Elias fired a warning shot into the dirt. "Back, Saul, back!" Elias's voice broke. Saul retreated to the far corner of the yard, collapsing into a ball, watching with wide, terrified eyes as Elias scooped Luna up. Her front leg was bent at a grotesque angle, and deep claw marks scored her shoulder, matting her white fur with bright red blood. She was breathing, but it was shallow and ragged. Dr. Eris arrived 20 minutes later with the transport truck. They didn't sedate Saul. He didn't fight them. He walked into the transport cage with his head low, looking back at the spot of bloody dust where Luna had fallen. He looked small again. "I told you, Elias," Eris said quietly as he stabilized Luna on the stretcher. "Love doesn't rewrite DNA." Elias didn't answer. He sat in the back of the truck, his hand on Luna's chest, feeling the faint beat of her heart. As the truck pulled away, separating the boy from his mother, a mournful, guttural howl erupted from the cage in the back, a sound of absolute despair. Saul was alone, and this time No one was coming to lick his face clean. The calendar on Elias's dashboard claimed only a year had passed, but the silence in the cabin made it feel like a lifetime. The seasons had turned the Zimanga scrub from brown to green and back to brown again. Luna sat in the passenger seat, her head resting on the open window frame. She was slower now, carrying a permanent limp in her front left leg, a jagged reminder of the day the family broke apart. Her eyes, however, were still sharp, scanning the horizon not for rabbits or gazelles, but for a ghost she hadn't ceased mourning. They were deep inside the rehabilitation zone, a vast, unfenced expanse of wilderness where hand-reared lions were taught the brutal laws of survival before true release. Elias had heard the reports. Saul was alive, but he was struggling. He was a loner, lacking a pride, and in the unforgiving politics of the savannah, isolation was usually a death sentence. Elias stopped the jeep near a dry riverbed, cutting the engine. "We shouldn't be here, old girl," he whispered, scratching Luna behind the ears. "Just one look, then we go home." But nature, as always, had its own script. From the dense thicket of acacia to their "Right!" a cacophony of snarls erupted. Dust billowed into the air. 3 young male lions, a coalition of nomadic brothers known in the reserve for their aggression, burst onto the riverbed. In the center of their violent circle was a solitary figure. It was Saul. He was magnificent, a full-maned king now, but he was cornered. His flank was bleeding, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The 3 brothers were coordinating their attack, nipping at his hindquarters, wearing him down. Saul roared, but there was fear in it. He was outnumbered, and the ghost of the terrified cub, who used to hide behind the sofa, was flickering in his eyes. He backed away, tripping over a tree root, exposing his throat. In the jeep, Luna went rigid. She didn't see 3 apex predators killing a rival. She didn't see the mathematics of inevitable death. She saw her sheep, her clumsy, oversized, foolish boy who was being bullied. Before Elias could grab her collar, Luna launched herself through the open window. "Luna, no!" Elias screamed, fumbling for his door handle. She hit the ground hard, stumbling on her bad leg, but scrambled up instantly. She didn't run away. She ran toward the fight. A 40-pound dog with a limp charging into a brawl of giants. She let out a sharp, commanding bark, the specific high-pitched cadence she used to use when Saul chewed on the tires. "Hey, break it up!" The sheer absurdity of the sound froze the battlefield. The 3 nomadic males turned, confused. A creature that should have been a snack was barking orders at them. One of the brothers, a scarred male with a black mane, snarled and lowered his head, preparing to snap this annoyance in half. He lunged at Luna. Time seemed to suspend. Elias, running from the jeep, knew he was too late. Luna stood her ground, hair bristling, barking defiantly at death itself. But death never reached her. A golden blur slammed into the black-maned lion with the force of a freight train. It was Saul. Seeing the danger to the only mother he had ever known, the hesitation in Saul vanished. The fear evaporated. In its place, a switch flipped. Not the defensive instinct of survival, but the protective fury of a king guarding his queen. Saul didn't just fight. He dominated. He clamped his jaws onto the attacker's neck, shaking him with terrifying power, then spun to swipe the second male with a blow that cracked like a whip. He roared, a sound so deep and primal it vibrated in Elias's chest 40 yards away. This wasn't a plea for help. It was a declaration of war. Mine. The coalition, sensing that the tide had turned against a maniacal defender, broke formation. They scattered, disappearing into the bush, leaving only the dust settling in the golden afternoon light. Saul stood panting, blood dripping from his muzzle. He turned slowly. Elias froze, rifle lowered. The lion was massive, lethal, a wild animal in every sense. But then Saul lowered his head. He walked toward Luna, not with the predatory stalk of a hunter, but with a low, submissive dip of his shoulders. Luna didn't back down. She sniffed his bloody nose, then, audacious as ever, gave a sharp nip to his ear. "You were reckless. You got hurt." Sol didn't growl. He let out a soft, rumbling chuff and collapsed onto his belly, rolling slightly to expose his throat to the dog, the ultimate gesture of trust. Luna licked the fresh wound on his flank, just as she had done when he was a 3-pound orphan in a cardboard box. Elias watched, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. He realized then that he hadn't saved Sol, and Luna hadn't just raised a lion. They had forged a soul that transcended species. After a long moment, Sol stood up. He looked at Elias, holding his gaze for a second, then looked back at the vast open horizon. He nudged Luna one last time with his massive head, almost knocking her over, before turning and walking slowly into the bush. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He was the king now, and his queen had given him permission to rule. Elias lifted Luna back into the jeep. She watched the spot where Sol had vanished, her tail giving a single, satisfied thump against the seat. They drove back in silence, leaving the wild to the wild, carrying home a peace that would last the rest of their days. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.